This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone, through the Spectra 1964 STX600 mic pre-complementer, and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
It's funny that the people you can meet doing a job that you don't necessarily want to do, and I think later in careers you can be more selective, but as long as you're working with a professional, I mean, who knows what can happen. Or do a gig and that the outcome of that gig can be nothing except maybe a few dollars, but you might meet someone that will give you a great launch in your career.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence, pushing USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Jay-Z Mics brings you the ultimate futuristic pop filter for your studio, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The Jay-Z pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while allowing important high frequencies for clarity. Plus, it looks super cool and you're hearing my voice on it right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off this amazing pop filter from jzmic.com.
When I master a song, I'm immersed and committed to a sonic fidelity from start to beyond finished. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. My goal in every master is to help you prepare so that you're not compromising your timeline, budget, or your mix. My iterative process helps build a relationship with you so that you don't have to ever second guess your mix. Let's pull back the curtains on mastering because there's no secrets here. Send me your mix and I'll give you free feedback or a free master demo. Just hit me up at soundporter.com.
Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Bob Horn, a multi-platinum Grammy award-winning mix engineer known for working with artists spanning many genres: R&B, pop, hip-hop, rock, adult, contemporary, and jazz, as well as artists from countries around the globe, including the US, Korea, Japan, Australia, Spain, Indonesia, Brazil, and China. Some of those artists include Usher, Timberland, Michael Jackson, DVRKO, Neon Trees, Kelly Clarkson, Brandy, Ashanti, Everglow, Akon, Lupe, Fiasco, Everclear, McKnight, LeAnn Rimes, The Common Kings, and many more. Bob attended Berklee College of Music before relocating to Nashville originally to start his career as a recording engineer, but in 2001 he moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career as a mix engineer. Although Bob's career's focus is on mixing, he's also an accomplished musician playing drums, guitar, bass, and piano, and is involved in songwriting and production as well. In 2011, Bob and a longtime friend and colleague designed and built the EchoBar Recording Studios in North Hollywood, California, where he mixes for his clients today. A big shout out and a thank you to Mayor Applebaum for making our introduction. Thanks very much, Mayor. And please welcome Bob Horn to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bob, are you ready to rock, man?
Yes, this is great. Thank you.
Good, man. Glad to have you here on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you and listen through your discography and really get to hear some of this great music you're mixing. Rockstars, of course, I've got a link in the show notes. Just click through and it'll take you to the blog post on the website where we've got a whole playlist if you want to check out some of Bob's work. But great stuff, man. Give us a little bit of a background as to who you are. We have a little bit of a similar path in that I started from Boston too, came to Nashville and spent a little time in LA, but I didn't stay there.
Oh, okay. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and what was it? I guess like many schools in America, when you reach like fourth or fifth grade, they make you choose either orchestra, band, or choir. And I chose band, so my dad gave me his old tenor sax, and so I started getting into music that way. And as I got later into that school, concert band, jazz band stuff, I started getting interested in other instruments.
Yeah,
and
no sense. Your dad had no sense of irony there, right?
Right.
Giving you a saxophone.
Right. Bob Horn. Yep. So I started, I just found instruments at both my cousin's house, because he was a musician, and also in our attic. My dad he had a guitar, and then my grandparents had an old beat up piano, and I just started liking all these different instruments. And I think around seventh grade, I started playing drums and piano. We had an exchange student from Ecuador who played drums. And so I don't know, I just started getting into the whole jam aspect with different people. And, eventually I think by high school, I played guitar, drums, bass, piano, and sax. And by the end of high school, I had an after school band and about every instrument. And then I played sax at school. So I pretty much didn't have time for homework, and I just played instruments all the time.
So was this like early 90s or something like that?
Yeah. So I was in high school from 91 to 94. And then I went to Berklee College of Music after high school, and I chose bass because they make you narrow it down to one instrument,
Right.
So I did bass, and then I guess in the second year you're allowed to enter the engineering program at Berklee. They make you do 1 year without a major, and just to really make sure what you want to do. So I chose in high school. I had interned at a couple studios in Cincinnati, and gotten real into. Back then we had ADATs for recording and Mackie mixers, and I did sound at my church and everything. So I was really into trying to record my own music and my friends, as well as being a musician. And I really, at that time, had not decided what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew I was really into gear and like PA systems and microphones and 4-track recorders and all that kind of stuff. And so when I got to Berklee, I kind of decided to get into the engineering program. And once I got in, I was hooked. And I still played bass all throughout my Berklee years, but I just kind of this feeling that I would end up being a studio guy. And so that's what I did. The final year I had to, my band gave me that I was in gave me the big choice. Like, do you want to stay here in Boston and be a bass player, or do you want to go to Nashville and be an engineer? And I chose engineering. And I don't know, I just the bug kind of hit me, and it's kind of like just a beautiful mix of art and science. And
yeah, it's fascinating thinking of, like hearing you talk about that and remembering the 90s. Just to put it in context, of course, the music that was on getting all the attention then was like the whole blossoming alternative scene, and then like the grunge scene and stuff.
Sure.
And it's funny also, like the music you make now, you're like clearly the king of bass, and it's funny to hear that you started out with bass too,
Well, yeah, and then at Berklee, I got exposed to so many different genres of music because of classes and roommates. And I used to just take my bass and go in the hallway and sit Indian style and practice my bass, just so I would meet people. And just walking down the hall by a dorm room, someone has their door open and they're playing some kind of world music, and you talk to them, and it was an amazing experience. Like, and also recording. Like, I ended up recording full big bands and jazz quartets and trios, and I recorded, I remember, German rap one time, which I was really, really an eye-opening experience. It was like American hip hop music, but the rap was German. And I barely even met people that spoke foreign languages in my community where I grew up, except for our exchange students. So I just really just kind of opened up the whole world to me. And I think by the time I left and went to Nashville, and then of course Nashville, I got introduced to country and contemporary Christian, but I would leave the studio as an intern or as an assistant listening to R&B. So I was all over the place. And then, now I just kind of have become someone that's known for working in different genres. Like there's some guys that are hip hop guys and some guys that are rock guys. And I'd say the least I am is a hard rock, heavy metal type engineer. I don't really ever claim to be good at those genres, but I mix occasional hard rock, very occasionally. But yeah, I mean, all the other genres, I'm just kind of all over the place, but in a big way, as far as having lots of work in the different genres. Like it's not just an occasional world music song. I'll mix something for Korea or for someone in Africa, and then the next day someone in Indonesia. So it's really weird, like how my career developed into this multi-genre thing, because a lot of my other friends, they don't really do that. So I don't know if it's good or not, but I enjoy it. It keeps it fresh,
That's cool. Well, certainly in your playlist, I hear a lot of stuff that has, an appreciation for the kind of the sub 808. And, and it makes me think that there's probably a couple of things. One is that may be something that you were drawn towards, but two is, that's also the style of music that's popular today too. So that may, I wonder if you feel like sometimes the things that we get good at as engineers just sort of follow where the music is taking us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all genres. I remember last year working on a country project. Has these three female country singers, and they're doing pretty modern music with some urban influence, programmed drums and stuff. So it's got their beautiful country vocals on top of it, and it has the country guitars and sometimes the fiddles and banjos. But the drums and bass will have lots of sub, and who even knows if I'm mixing that correctly. There's not really a gauge for that with that mix of genres, so
yeah,
it's interesting.
We'll certainly have a lot of questions for you about what is the right, how do you gauge the subs and the low end? Yeah. I imagine that's probably one of the big challenges. Tell us a little bit more about, going from Nashville out to LA and kind of getting settled in there.
Well, I think out of college, I just was kind of nervous about moving across the whole country, and I only had one friend out here in LA that worked in the music world, and then I had a bunch more friends in Nashville. So my parents were at the time, I think they were in Louisville, Kentucky, which is only like 3 hours away. So I decided to go to Nashville, and I also kind of appreciated the fact that Nashville was live musicians. This was 1998, and the guys I talked to out in LA that were graduated the previous year, they were just talking about how everything was drum machines and vocal recording and not much else. And as a starting out engineer assistant, I was still kind of really into microphones and having musicians on the sessions. And I was more excited about that because that's what I had been doing the last 4 years. So I chose Nashville. And sure enough, that's what it was when I got there. It was just a much more intense version. It was like 7 guys on a session. They listen to a demo tape and then run out in the studio and record the song. And in Nashville, I still maintain that Nashville, I don't know about nowadays, but when I was coming up, Nashville had the best assistants because they were always under the most pressure and the most eyes on you and the most people expecting you to deliver, as an assistant and not screw things up. So, I was happy I went there, and I was there for about 3 years. And the other cool thing about Nashville is at the time when you were a studio assistant, you were freelance. You weren't a staff person, which is how LA has always run. So I got to be at a lot of different studios. And I think my last count before I moved away, I'd worked at like something like 38 studios across Nashville.
Wow.
And when you're freelance, it's tougher because, we always had to bill the record label. We didn't rely on the studio to give us a paycheck every week, but you got more money. And back then the minimum wage was probably $8, and I made like 15 an hour as an assistant. So, but you also were free to do your own schedule, say no to a gig. And it also erased the line between assistant and engineer. So if someone hired you for a vocal overdub, you didn't have to quit your job like you did in LA to do that. It's like and it could be at a different studio from your main studio. So I really like Nashville for that aspect, because I got to engineer before I moved away. I got to engineer a lot more often than I think people that became interns and assistants in LA did at first. I think people in LA had to put in their time a lot more often from the past students I'd talked to that had moved to LA. So I think I kind of got a faster progression definitely through interning, and then through assisting. By the time I left Nashville, I'd mixed a few records and definitely engineered a handful of sessions. So and the other thing about Nashville is the studios were just, everyone was a gear freak. It's like the studios always had the latest and greatest and multiple machines. It's like they had so many formats to record onto, and I learned so much because I got to assist so many engineers. And they do sessions in Nashville, or they did, I don't know about now, but they did sessions that were like track 10 songs in a day, because the musicians are just so quick and good. So it was a lot faster paced. And I knew in LA, one band would rent out a studio for 2-3 months, and you'd be with the same group of people for a long time. And I'm sure there's benefits to that, but I got to learn from a lot of people and quickly decide who was doing things right and who was doing things wrong, and cling on to the people that I thought were doing it right. And I just learned so much from so many different people. So I really enjoyed Nashville. But in the end, I just decided musically it was kind of limited. It's like country was just country. Everyone was trying to be Shania Twain, pop country. And the only really kind of other outlet you had was contemporary Christian for like R&B or any other kind of genres, pop, and that stuff was cool. There was a lot of talented people, but the record sold 10,000 copies. So making a name as an engineer in the future and stuff like that, contemporary Christian, everything was just kind of less. The rates, the networking, everything was just kind of less than the global world of secular pop or any of the other genres I was interested in. And the other thing about country engineering back then is it seemed like people kind of did the same thing all the time, and their hands were kind of tied, because you had the top 5 drummers, top 5 bass players, top 5 guitar players that these producers would hire, and everyone else was just waiting for their little moment to kind of prove themselves. So you're always working with the same people in regards of the country musicians, and even if you had different engineers and producers, it seemed to be like the same guys making the same guitar licks, same drum fills, and of course not exactly. I'm exaggerating a little, but it sure seemed that way after 2 or 3 years.
Like once you learned how to get Michael Rhodes' bass sound, you knew how to do that on every session. or whoever was playing,
Yeah, I mean, I literally knew a guy that worked 9 to 5, and a lot of his outboard gear from his cartage gear, he would move it from studio to studio. You'd take the cases off, and the settings would stay.
Yeah,
and he'd barely tweak them, and it's like they just kind of felt uninteresting to me. And not everyone was like that, but I felt like LA might just be more of a place to spread my wings and learn even more and delve deeper into the sonic world of engineering and musically and everything. And I was right when I got out here. I just worked on so much, so many different things, and I still do. It's never changed. And I know Nashville has now changed. It's many years later, and 20 years later to be exact. And I'm sure it's way different. I know it's different as a city when I visited, but musically, I think a lot more rock acts have moved there, and I think there's music of all styles there now, more so than 20 years ago. But
definitely,
yeah, I definitely like LA for the music aspect, and there's so many people here doing entertainment in general. So yeah, that's kind of how I moved out here. I decided one day to do it, and I kind of had an interim of being in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I worked with James Brown for a little bit.
And nice interim.
And then I worked on that was just a few sessions. I mean, the longest part of that, I was just kind of working at a couple studios, but I learned a lot. I learned about recording symphonies, and I worked with some people, and it kind of, that little interim was great for making some mistakes and kind of relearning some things and experimenting. And then when I went out to LA, I kind of felt more prepared.
You may already know that iZotope creates the very best smart plugins for mixing and mastering. But did you know that now you can get them all through iZotope's new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. But what if you want to record direct keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the stereo BBDI 2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad at spectra1964.com. Well, so I always heard the story that James Brown, when he's like dancing around and he throws his hand back in the middle of a dance move, that was for clams that the band was making, and that was how many dollars you were going to be deducted from your night's pay. So tell us about making some mistakes on a James Brown session.
I think luckily I didn't make any on a James Brown session. I recorded B3, some background vocals, and I did drums on a song, and I didn't get to record his lead vocals. He was going to do those in the next week, and down in Atlanta. He loved to drive a few hours to Charlotte to record just because he loved the studio. It was called Reflections, and I don't even know if it's around anymore, but it was a great experience. And no one could wear hats. He didn't like people wearing hats in the studio, and everyone was Mr. So it was Mr. Horn or Mr. Brown or Mr. whoever. And his speech was so unique that most of the time his nephew, I believe it was, would kind of translate. His nephew was a producer and maybe a music director. I don't quite remember, but he would almost have to translate for him, because of how he would speak. It was kind of awesome. But
that's cool, man.
Definitely had a lot of fun on those couple sessions.
Very cool. All right. So you went out to LA. What were some of I know it's been a minute, but what were some of the classic challenges of showing up in a new city that you remember and sort of breaking into a scene?
The biggest thing was just finding work. I kind of decided that I wouldn't be an assistant anymore, and I would just be an engineer. So I didn't have the studio thing to fall back on as far as submitting an invoice, or not an invoice, a resume, and getting on board with the big studio and climbing the ladder again. And I guess I just felt like it was time, and I didn't want to start over completely. So, and hindsight, I don't know if that was a good idea or not, but I found, I was just riding around with my one couple friends I had in LA one day, and one of my friends got a call for a recording session, and he didn't want to engineer anymore. He had done his share of engineering. He wanted to more be a producer, and he kind of passed the gig to me, and that was my first gig in LA. And it turned out the studio owner was also a producer, and he wanted me to kind of be his regular engineer. And there wasn't much money in it, but I made a couple bucks here and there, and I spent a lot of time there, and I just kind of made friends. And then that kind of branched out into meeting another friend who was a producer, and he was actually a producer back in New York. So I actually flew to New York a few times. So I was working more in New York than LA, even though I lived in LA. And man, it was probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years more before I really settled into really solid, decent paying work. So that was probably the biggest challenge. And I found it with a producer that had done some pretty big hip hop stuff and R&B stuff. And I became his daily guy. I actually flew home to Charlotte for Christmas, and the studio I had worked at back a couple of years ago in Charlotte during my year in between Nashville and LA, they called me and said, a big producer's coming into town. We know you're here for Christmas. We want someone solid to work with him. And so I took the gig and I extended my Christmas vacation and I worked with him. And funny enough, I found out we lived down the street from each other back in LA. So did four days of work with him. The session went well. He decided that he wanted me to work with him back in LA. So we flew back, and I guess he had gotten recently a couple big checks, and we ended up going to Guitar Center, and me being his new engineer, I advised him on gear to buy, and he wanted to outfit a whole home studio. So we spent 12 hours at Guitar Center buying, I think, 70 grand worth of gear. So it was a blast.
Had we moved away from ADATs at this point?
Yeah. So this was Pro Tools. This was 2003. Pro Tools, probably 4 or 5 by that point. And so pretty young in the Pro Tools world. Yeah. But we had to buy everything, like a desk, and I think we bought 13 keyboards and stands for everything, and an MPC and tons of plugins. There were a lot less plugins back then, but we sure bought a lot of them. And so that was a blast setting that up. And I worked with him. His name was Ron Feemster. He also went by the nickname Nephew. And I did everything we recorded, and I mixed about 99% of his stuff for about 5 years. So that gave me my big credits as a starting point. Those were the biggest records I had done to that point in my career with him. So that was a great launching pad career-wise, and it kind of took the pressure off working with a producer, because he was already had success with Eminem and Dr. Dre and some other people, and so I kind of just rode his coattails as far as getting gigs and having work and employment. I didn't have to be, even though I was freelance, I didn't have to search for my job. So working with a producer was a great launching pad career-wise.
Yeah, and then also just having that consistency of mixing over and over again probably really helped you dial in your chops at that point.
Yeah, and he had days where, we spent most of the time at his house, and he would just pay me like a monthly flat rate, and that was pretty good to get by on. But then when we would have the major label gigs, we would go to the big studios, and I could invoice the label. So it was a good building block for sure.
So one of the takeaways I would have from hearing you share these stories, of course, is just that reminder that, the process of breaking in, it's always, you were willing to work over Christmas. You're willing to pick up, a gig that somebody else doesn't really want to do initially. And it's just that reminder to always be willing to just jump in and do the tough stuff at first, just to get the opportunity, right?
Yeah. I mean, opportunity is everything. I mean, and being prepared for that opportunity when you do it. It's funny that the people you can meet doing a job that you don't necessarily want to do. And I think later in careers you can be more selective, but I don't know, as long as you're working with a professional, I mean, who knows what can happen. I mean, you can do a gig, and that the outcome of that gig can be nothing except maybe a few dollars, but you might meet someone that will give you a great launch in your career or a nice big credit. I always have I have this kind of triangle of this list of 3 things that I always say you need 2 of these to decide if you're going to do a gig. So there's money, there's career, if it's good for your career, and there's if you just like the people or the music. So as long as you have 2 out of those 3 things, it's a good idea to do the job. If you have none of them, you definitely should not do it. And if you only have one of those things, for instance, money, I've taken gigs just because there was money involved. And it's you have to be careful with that, because you can definitely put yourself through a punishment, just over some money. So if you don't have bills piling up, maybe not take that gig if it's going to make you unhappy, or if it's not good for your career.
Yeah, the career thing. Maybe talk a little more about that, because that was something that, sometimes it's easier to see it in hindsight than it is moving forward. But Again, like you
Yeah,
said, you could work on something that doesn't look like a career move, but maybe you impress somebody else just because you work well on it, and then that person introduces you to it. But there are definitely, you can also work on records that just simply don't get released and nobody ever knows what you did.
sure. I mean, I have plenty of those. There's so much more indie music happening because of the progress in technology and home recording and cheap recording. There's so much more indie music, and that's one thing in Nashville. It's like most of the things I was working on were guaranteed to come out and were, maybe even on a major label, because to even have the budget to rent a studio where I was an assistant, you had to have some money. So that means you probably had marketing money. You probably had some drive to, make your money back. So you were, serious as an artist. Now there's so many people that they're just hobbyists, and sometimes you don't know, or they think they want it. They think they want a music career, but they don't know how hard it is yet. They don't know how much work it takes, and they don't realize that. So a lot of people think they'll just get a manager, and the manager will do all the business stuff, and they don't realize that that's not modern thinking. It's like managers don't. Most of them, I should say, most of the good ones don't hold your hand these days. Like, you have to be more than just a good singer or a good rapper. You have to, get into the business. You have to know how to do the social media and grow your brand and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot different nowadays, but it's funny, like the thing about drive, there's so many artists that they seem like they have drive, but when you really vet them and further investigate, you realize that they kind of want to be famous or successful, but they don't have the drive to get there,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, career wise, as an engineer, you can take a job that is with a good person or a talented person, and it doesn't do anything, but it was still a good experience. And maybe you meet somebody, and that somebody might do something that's more successful and furthers your career more. And sometimes it can be an indie artist that surprises you. They get a placement, or their song actually becomes a hit, or something. So it's definitely hard to see that moving forward, rather than think about it later in hindsight. But as you do more and more gigs and jobs, you'll be able to see those things ahead of time a little better. And nowadays, with everyone that's a serious artist, or even an amateur artist, or not as serious, everyone has social media, so you can kind of vet them, go through their stuff, see what they sound like, see what their engagement is. I had an artist that bought all of their likes from YouTube and paid money so that he could have tons of likes. But then you look at his comments, and there's only 10 comments, and it's like, that doesn't add up. So it's like, okay, you want to work with me, but you don't have any social media engagement, any true engagement. Look at your Instagram. You have very few followers. I have more as an engineer than you do as an artist. And you've been at this for a few years now. Something's not right, So then you ask them, so after I mix your song, what's your marketing plan? Like, how much money are you devoting to marketing? And if they're like the type of person that's just going to take their song and release it on SoundCloud with no money, or even put it on like Spotify with no budget and no promotion, no PR people, no publicist, then I don't know. It's not good for your career. So then you got to go to my little triangle again. Is it good money, and are you going to be happy working on it? Is it good music? And so maybe that's enough. It's maybe no one will, hear it, or, not enough people to change your career, but will you be happy? Do you like the people? Even if it's a friend, and it's not going to go anywhere, that could still be a good reason to work on it. And if you make a little scratch along the way, some cash, that's cool too.
Yeah.
But
it's fun to work with people you like sometimes in music, right?
Yeah. I mean, I still do, I rarely do tracking sessions anymore, but I have friends that I've recorded for them in the past, and if they ask me, I'll do it. Sometimes it's just fun to work with a band when you've been mixing for months and months, and so friends are always a good reason. Most of the time, a good reason to work.
So tell us about EchoBar Recording Studio. This is a place that you built out there with another friend of yours. And is it like this is your primary mix room?
Yeah, it's my only mix room. So it's my home. It's my little cave. We built it in 2011. My studio partner, his name is Eric Rikers. He's a great engineer and mixer himself. He and I have been friends since he moved out here with me from Nashville. We left Nashville together and moved out here. And we were roommates for a short time. And, we've always been friends. And we had a mutual Nashville friend that moved out years later, around 2010, I believe. And I had been renting a studio called The Hive, and had an SSL and a bunch of outboard gear and big room. And we were, our friend moved out, and he had built a studio himself for about $11,000. And we watched him build it from scratch, put up the studs, all the acoustic treatment, put the doors on. And he had a bunch of great ways to save money. And but he kind of inspired us, like, oh, it doesn't take millions to build a studio. Like it can be done cheaper. And ours was certainly a lot more than $11,000. But we just seeing him go through the process and learning, we decided to take it on. So Eric and I were sitting in a Denny's restaurant one evening, and we decided, the studio I was currently leasing, that whole process, I guess business was going to crash and burn because of the rest of the building was a indie record label, and it was they were going to leave the building, sell it to someone else, and move on. And so I was going to be without a studio in a matter of months. So we decided to follow our friend's lead, and Eric and I decided to build. So we started looking for properties and where we would want to build a studio and what square footage would be proper. And we did a bunch of Google SketchUp designs, kind of designing our studio on each floor plan. So every building we looked at, we quickly left and, designed a floor plan to see how a control rooms would fit and how many control rooms could we do and how big of a live room could we do for tracking and, bathrooms and all that stuff. And went through probably 6 or 7. And then we found this one property that it just fit like a glove. It fit 2 control rooms, 3 booths, and a nice big live room and a kitchen. And the rent was right. The location was decent. And we just went for it. And we started designing it. And then we started the build. And I think we signed the lease in February and started building in April. And we had our first session in September, and the studio still wasn't completely done, but I think it was finally completely done by December. So about half a year, a little longer, 3/4 of a year, we got it up and running, and it's been my my mix home ever since, and it's my favorite room. And I decided if I was ever gonna leave, I would build this room somewhere else, whether it was in a house or another building or something, just because we're both so happy with this whole studio. I would at least take the control room design with me and do it again if I had to.
Adam Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class studio for professional mixing and mastering. Their unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design is famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that let your speakers disappear into your music, allowing you to focus on the mix. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at adam-audio.com/education. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for The Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that has made API famous for 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth-as-glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of the box at apiaudio.com. What's some of the stuff that you remember arriving at where you're like, wow, these are key things to consider when you're setting up a control room? I'm actually going through a control room redesign now, having not really, I paid attention to stuff, but I'm working with a designer now and it's getting done better. And it's so remarkable how much better it sounds when you treat a room properly and everything. What was some of the stuff that you discovered along the way?
Well, Eric did a lot of internet research, and by that time, so it was 2010. I left Berklee in 1998. By that time, I had literally worked in over 200 studios in America. I mean, we're talking Nashville, Florida, Boston. The school had 11 studios, and then I worked in like 3 or 4 others around Boston, and then Nashville, I worked at like 30 or 40.
Yeah,
and
38, right?
Yeah, 38. And then out here in, some in Florida, some in New York, a bunch in LA, all over the place. I had worked in so many studios. So I kind of collected in my brain what I liked and what I disliked about studios. And, I'd been in definitely a bunch of makeshift studios and home studios.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had all that knowledge. And then Eric did a bunch of research on room modes and bass and standing waves and bass trapping and just acoustic stuff. And, we understood everything we could. I think I took a couple acoustics classes at Berklee, but everything was math and just overly complicated for me.
That's why we went into music in the first place. So we wouldn't have to do that, right?
None of that helped me. But, Eric came up with these 3 dimensions, 3 sizes of control rooms that had great musical modes, like small amount of cancellations as long as you did the treatment right. And the dimensions were just very musical and good. And we picked the middle size. There was one smaller, and then there was one much larger. And then, so we picked the middle size, and it ended up being 14.5 by 21. And then the ceiling height was 9 feet. And so we just trusted that. And then when I left my old studio that I had been in, I got to take all the acoustic treatment with me that we had put up ourselves to make the place sound better. So I had a bunch of professional, it was called John Mansville, which is kind of like Owens Corning 703. And for people that don't know, that's compressed fiberglass that you put in the walls, and it's great absorption. And I had gotten to take a bunch of that, which saved us a lot of money, and bring it to the new studio. So we literally just experimented. We decided, also based on our friend that had moved out and built his own studio, we kind of took some cues from him on how he built it. We got some advice from him along the way. And then, other than that, like in our live room, we would put up material against the walls and just make noise and play music and see how it sounded, and then move it a few feet. And so, in the control room, we just decided how we were going to do the acoustic treatment, and then how we were going to build the bass traps. And we got a little bit of experience from that, not only from research, but also the studio I was in prior. When I moved in, we had kind of made it better by adding a treatment. And our clouds, we got some experience hands-on building those from my last studio. And, so it was the other trick I kind of did is I let Eric build faster than me. So I kind of watched what he did as he built. And then I decided, I was doing mostly the same stuff, but just barely different. And
so you mentioned bass traps, 703, clouds. Do you want to just like quickly kind of break those down a little bit for the rock stars?
Sure. So bass trapping is anything you put in the room that will absorb bass, like a couch. Actually putting a couch in the back of your control room changes the low end in the control room, and it actually absorbs. But we actually built a wall. So the wall has it's 3 feet deep, and it has a cloth and a wood frame covering it. So you don't see that 3 feet. So the room is 21 feet long, but visually it looks 17 feet long.
Right.
And so there's 3 feet of stuff inside, and the stuff is a few things. So there's corner traps, which are mine are made out of pegboard with a wood frame to kind of angled across the corner at 45 degrees. And people have different theories on that, but mine are made out of pegboard, so they have all those little holes in it. Like people in their garage will use pegboard for hanging pots or something. But I found pegboard to be a great membrane for adjusting bass, and so I have 2 of those corner traps that I made out of pegboard.
In the back or the front of the room?
In actually all 4 corners.
Okay.
But in the back specifically, I have those. And then we have what we call hangers, which are, they look like graham crackers, but really large. They're 2 feet wide, and they're almost as tall as the ceiling, but they're a little bit short. They're probably about a half foot shorter. So if the ceiling is 9 feet, these are about 8 feet 4 inches, and they hang by picture wire, really strong picture wire. And their soundboard, I think that's the nickname for it. I don't know the actual term, but it's kind of like wood, but it's a little bit softer, but it absorbs sound. And then on top of those, we stapled soft insulation on either side, and then we dangle it from the ceiling, and it hangs. So if you were to push it with your hand, it would swing. But there's 9 of them across, from left to right, and they basically just absorb bass. So in the front of that, I have another big sheet of pegboard that's probably 8 feet by 8 feet wide, and then 9 feet tall as the ceiling. And that is a membrane. And as soon as that goes up, if you have speakers in the room at the time, you hear this it's kind of a tightening of 40, 50, 60 hertz. So it's a great membrane for the back of a room, at least in my room, dimension wise. And I kind of pulled that from my last studio before that, because we did the same thing. And then the whole thing is covered by cloth, so you don't see any of it. It just is like the back of the room, and then the couch is in front of that. So that's my whole back wall. And then the front wall is just those corner traps I had talked about. And then the clouds. So clouds are basically to keep the ceiling from being reflective. So my clouds are basically these wide, full. They're basically the size of the ceiling, and there's 3 of them that make up the total length and width of the ceiling. So I guess you could imagine they're probably like 12 or 13 feet wide, by 8 inches thick, and then maybe 12 to 13 feet long, and then 4 feet wide, and then 8 inches thick. And they're filled with that same stuff we used in the sidewalls, which is John Mansfield fiberglass. And those basically just absorb. They're 4 inches thick as far as the acoustic material on the inside, but they also hold the lights for the room. So, and they kind of bring the ceiling down visually from 9 feet to 8 feet. And there's a couple gaps between each one, so they're kind of spaced out, and they have wood trim, so they look nice. So it makes a nice ceiling, but also an effective ceiling that not only is somewhat of a low-mid bass trap, but it's also a high frequency absorber, and it holds the lights. And so those are the clouds, and they're in the whole room. So not only above the mix position, which clouds above the mix position are pretty popular in studios. These actually cover my entire ceiling. And in the front wall holds a gigantic screen for Pro Tools, and then that's covered in cloth. And there's some absorption behind the TV and behind the speakers, just to kind of calm down any reflections. It's a pretty late reflection point since the speakers are pointing the opposite way, but I just kind of did it for good measure. I'm not an acoustic expert. I think we just got lucky and did some research and found, asked friends that kind of knew what they were doing.
And you said that Eric was building his room first. So did you feel like some of the studio design was like you could hear it, then you could put something up and hear the difference and decide that you liked it?
Not quite. I mean, he was only about 2 weeks ahead of me. So it might have been more aesthetic choices. There's not much that's different in our rooms. He built an entirely different type of front wall because he has soffitted speakers. Mine are freestanding. But like our lights are a little bit different. And I think our back wall is slightly different dimensions, but they're pretty much the same room. But I guess I was able to kind of verify that everything was a good idea since we were both kind of feeling out the waters. But I think we just got lucky in general,
What monitors do you like to mix on?
So I use Asperger's. They're called Solo 15s with 18-inch subs. So they're basically what most people would call main monitors, but they are freestanding. So that has allowed me to move them even an inch. And you won't believe what moving an inch with a speaker will change. Can change the sound so much. But a guy named Dave Malakpour, who now owns Asperger Company, he tunes my room whenever I need it, and it's just they're a phenomenal match to my control room. So they have 15-inch mid-woofers, they have horn-loaded beryllium tweeters, and then 18-inch subs on each side. So it's a pretty massive system. It'll fill out the whole room musically. It can crush your chest with bass if you wanted to. But they're also very sensitive, and you can listen to them very softly and hear incredible detail. And matched with the room, it's just phenomenal. Everyone pretty much seems to like my room. And Dave Pensato he actually modeled the blueprints of our room off of his, and also got the same Asperger's as I did for his control room because he liked how it sounded so much. And
That's
he worked
cool.
out of here. We worked out of my room, kind of like a day shift, night shift thing for about a year. And
who got the night shift?
Oh, me, of course. Yeah. So we called it quits when I got tired of sleeping at 6 a.m. But but it was fun. But yeah, the Asperger's, they have DSP on their amps, and so you can tune them and then store the EQ curve on the flash RAM of the amp itself. And so we use like Room EQ Wizard or something like that to analyze the room, and then its own proprietary software to do the EQing corrections. And Dave will measure where they're at in the room and kind of figure out if they need to be tilted or switched or move forward an inch or two or something. And spend about 3 hours on it, maybe once every year and a half, to just kind of refresh the tuning and get them to sound optimal. But the room is 0 dB at 20 hertz. It'll actually reproduce a 20 hertz frequency wave.
Wow.
And so it's pretty phenomenal, and just great for mixing. And it's impressive when people come in, even during a tracking session, just to be able to hear, because there are a lot of studios that have big speakers like that, but because they're in the wall or, it's just not an optimal room for acoustics, and it just sounds loud. It doesn't sound good, but this can be loud or good, so it's pretty fun.
The Spectra 1964 Custom Shop now offers the STX100D, the big brother to the now famous STX100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Arden, Advision, R&amp, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 comp limiter, then check out the new STX600 modules, combining the STX100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. That's how you're hearing my voice. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and comp limiters. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence. It pushes USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt, giving you high-speed audio data and recording and playback. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Creativity without limits, only from OWC. Imagine never having to worry about your external drive interface again or compatibility from studio to studio. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. iZotope is a secret weapon for your studio that can help you get consistently pro-sounding mixes. And now you can get access to all their plugins through the new subscription options. Only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and much more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Bob Horn, joining us from EchoBar Studios in LA. Bob, are you ready to jam, dude?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. We were just talking about low end and bass and having your room tuned with a sweet spot for listening. And it reminds me to ask you, as I think about that, and I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with this, is this idea of getting up and moving around the room and checking the bass in all these different areas and locations. Do you find that that's still part of the process, or when your room is tuned, do you sort of stay in the sweet spot to judge your low end?
Me personally, it just works staying in the sweet spot. I don't really, I don't feel like I have to check it in other places in the room, but I have let clients sit down in my chair to listen, and I will back up in the room and stand in a different spot. And that might make me make a decision or realize like maybe it is too much bass or something, but I'm just kind of lucky where the room, it just kind of seems to translate like the comments. This is why acoustics are so much important than spending money on a plugin or a mic or anything like that, because what you're hearing is so important. Mm-hmm. And, like I don't really do car checks anymore on mixes, which is a popular thing. I pretty much just listen to my speakers and I'll check it in a pair of headphones, a pair of earbuds. And then I have kind of a lower end prosumer type of speaker off to the left of my control room in a different area. And, I don't know, like most of the comments I get are more opinions of things that are taste based. So, someone might like less reverb, or they want their vocals a little louder on the track. So before I had my room so what I would consider perfect, I had to do a lot more car checks, and things would be very out of whack. Like, I was monitoring on some other speakers, and the bass would be way too heavy on a frequency or way too quiet on a frequency, and the key of the song would change that. And I just had to remember, okay, this frequency is always loud on my mixes because of the way my room is, so I have to keep that in mind. But then sometimes that's where the key of the song lived, on the root note of the song, and it would cause issues. So mm-hmm. It's invaluable to have your whatever room you're mixing in be something that very well. And also, if you can, have it just the best sounding and most true acoustically. And I know for some people, they're in apartments or houses, or they don't have access to people that can help make their room sound great. So I know it's a tough thing, but if it is something that you can do for yourself, it goes such a long way to making your stuff sound better, more than any kind of plugin or processor or something.
Have you seen people overdo the room, like over-treat it and kind of go too far and screw things up?
Yeah, for sure. I've seen people over absorb a room, like it's so dead. And mine is pretty dead, but I do have my entire floor is hardwood, and I do have some things in the room on the walls that are, hard surfaces. Not much, but I've been in rooms that just were so absorptive that it was just fatiguing on the ears, and you just hear stuff differently. Like it's just, it has no natural ambience to it, and I don't know. It's mine isn't overly dead, I don't think, but it is a little dead, and I tend to like that in the control room. But definitely, you can overdo it. You can over trap bass. You can over absorb high end. You can have too much reflection. You definitely have to be careful with what you're doing. I think that's why it's such a mystery to so many of us, and requires so much experimentation.
Do you think there's any like indicator we could listen for in a room to know that it's overtreated, or is it more like you said, it just feels funny, or it's sort of tiring to listen to?
It's it can be hard to pinpoint things. You can have cancellations. It's just, I mean, if you feel like you have experienced ears, you should go by if you're getting the results you want, and if it sounds comfortable to you and you like working there. And if you're inexperienced, you might need someone with more experience to kind of set things up for you, and then just kind of go from there. And as your ears get more in tuned through the years, you'll be able to do it yourself and check things and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, you answered that. I can cross off the question about the car jam because you already answered that. But what about the process of learning how to mix in all those wrong spaces before you finally had the right space? Do you sometimes feel like that was really valuable and you have to just kind of go through some of that learning curve to really understand what it is that's so right about the space once you have it dialed in?
I don't know. I feel like it helped me learn what I prefer and what I had wrong.
Yeah.
Like in the different apartments I lived in, what was wrong with my little setups there, and even professional control rooms that just weren't that great. What I didn't like about those, and how could I avoid those when I built my own control room. So I think those things were valuable, but it's just, I think it's all experimentation. And when you're mixing, if you don't feel like you have a great acoustic space, and believe me, it's like having a great acoustic space is hard to come by. It's even as a professional, I think, again, I always say I got lucky, but and some people, they do well in their own spaces, and I think that's totally possible. I think you have to know what your speakers are doing and listen to your mixes somewhere else. And that somewhere else can be the car. It can be a friend's studio. You can email something to a friend and say, what does it sound like over there? I feel like the bass is too big over here. And you can, maybe you like the way his bass is in his mixes, and he can tell you, oh yeah, you should do this, or you should lower the bass on this, or he can tell you it's great, keep going. And then you can use that mix as a reference moving forward, or people, you can use your own favorite. You can use your favorite mixes as a marker. The danger is sometimes you just can't hear certain things. Like if there's a weird cancellation, you might listen to your favorite mix that your favorite pro mixer did, and you might use that as your reference, but it just isn't sounding the way it's supposed to in your room. So you still might make a mistake. So if you have a pair of headphones, or some of these new products coming out, like the Embody headphone thing, or the Slate VSX, where you can simulate a control room. Sometimes I know pros that use that stuff even just to double check stuff and simulate another space. I think Sonar Works and Waves have some of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to check your mixes somewhere else, even if it's a pair of headphones, just to be in have a different pair of transducers in a different space, even if that space is your headphones, it's different. So it's going to be different than speakers. So if you learn that stuff, I have a friend that had a horrible control room, but he knew his little tannoys, and he knew that room, and he knew what was wrong with it, and he did great work just because he knew it so well, and he knew what was happening. So it can be done. You just have to put in maybe a little more effort,
So, one of the things that comes to mind, of course, is the styles of music. Obviously, if you're going to be the king of bass mixing, you need to really be able to hear that low end. And of course, there are other genres of music where it just doesn't matter quite as much, and probably there's more room for, as long as you have your bass guitar fundamental, maybe that's, as deep as you need to focus. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in some of the styles I work in, we have 808. Sometimes the 808 is it's almost like the 808 is the artist of the song featuring the singer, It's like, so, and definitely EDM music, Do
you do a lot of EDM as well?
I did a lot this year. I did probably 35, 36. I was backing up the hard drive the other day. I think it's 35 or 36 EDM records for, you mentioned in my bio, the DVRKO. It's Darko, but he uses a V instead of an A.
Oh, okay.
He's a DJ that has featured artists on his stuff. And we did a lot this year as far as EDM. And I can't say that I mix EDM like a lot of other EDM guys. I probably mix it more from a pop standpoint, but he seems to like it. And we've done some good records that way, but definitely those styles of music, it's hard to work if you're not hearing it. If you're not hearing that bottom octave, if you're not hearing 40 hertz, it's hard to work on that, So then you really have to get into using meters and RTAs, spectrum analyzers and stuff like that. So, and of course, those frequencies, even if you have a speaker that only goes down to 70 hertz before it starts rolling off, 30 hertz will still affect it. You just have to know how it's affecting it and what to listen for. But man, if you add a sub to that and your room can reproduce the stuff decently, it takes the guessing work out of the way a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the reminders is for us to remember that even if the speaker's not reproducing 30, it's probably still moving the speaker cone.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just the cabinet doesn't reproduce it, right?
Right, exactly. Like that was the old NS10 thing. It started rolling off at 70 hertz, but people were still mixing 30, 40, 50 hertz on an NS10, and it doesn't mean that those frequencies are gone when it starts to roll off. And that's an important thing about EQ as well. It's like just because you roll off something at 100 hertz doesn't mean everything below 100 is 100% gone. It's just lower in level unless you do a super, super steep curve. But if you have a curve of like 24 dB per octave, which is something we see common on plug-in EQs, on every EQ, but you can visually see it on plugins, then all those frequencies are still there. They're just lower in level for every octave it drops. But, even though those speakers may not reproduce them on their spec sheets, it's still affecting the way the woofer moves. And, we used to blow up a lot of NS10 woofers by
mine are sitting on the shelf right now.
too big,
Mine are sitting on the shelf after their very last bass overdub.
Nice.
But they'll come back. Back. That's how you find the low frequencies on an NS10, Rockstars, is you wait till the cone is turned into confetti and it'll come across the controller mount you, and you found it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So, bass music, why don't I stay on that topic for just a minute? Okay. What are some differences that you've learned doing EDM and the low end that's going on there versus some of the 808 and hip hop low end?
Well, I find there's more freedom in the EDM stuff. And then with the hip hop and trap music, you kind of have to have some how should I say this? You kind of have to have the low end, and it can be various levels, big or small. But for most people, when you're listening to most of the top 40 trap hits or something like that, they're gonna have a similar amount of low end. Different mixers will have different amounts, but on EDM, it's a lot more flexible, and it just depends on what the artist wants and what the producers want. So on EDM, the artist, the DJ Darko that I've mixed for this year, he likes a lot of low end. That's why, I'm approaching it the way I just naturally do, and he seems to like it. But he started as a hip hop producer, so I think that it just works for him and I. But you definitely hear some low end that's just different. It might have a little more upper bass and just kind of be tighter, in the 40, 50 hertz range, and just kind of be more compressed. And EDM, they love loudness, they love loud mixes, and I think a lot of genres do these days, but EDM especially, they have probably the loudest mixes along with rock music. So a lot of their stuff is tighter, and sometimes it can be clipping and be more about the punch with kind of a nod to deep sub bass, but it's not moving you like hip hop or trap or even this kind of new genre drill. Like their stuff might be a little tighter than trap, but it's still got some pretty big bass. So EDM, I think you just have more choices, and you can just kind of decide where you want to be. Like if you listen to Calvin Harris, his stuff is a lot tighter, but it's also very loud. So that's kind of what they like, whoever's working on that stuff. But and like everyone's different, Skrillex, Dead Mouse, all these different guys. Their low end is all kind of their personal taste, and I think even besides low end, I think EDM, you just get more flexibility in what you want to do. I think that's why there's so many subgenres of EDM, future house and drum and bass. Like there's all these genres. Like I think there's tons, but
it's all dubstep to me.
Right. So dubstep, particularly, it felt like the dubstep that kind of appeared, at least in my mind, around 2010 or 2009. It seemed to have a lot of low end, and so it's kind of interesting. EDM as a genre, it's the global name of all of the EDM genres, but yeah, there's so much flexibility,
Yeah, I've definitely noticed a big difference in low end. I am no longer a secret, as everybody listens to the show knows, that I like dubstep music. But like the difference between a Skrillex mix and Kill the Noise, it's a different kind of sub, and like you said, Dead Mouse, his low end it's sort of almost like a more of a Bloom upper register or something. And then, if you just put on Spotify and you just say, play old school hip hop radio versus play hip hop radio, it's like an octave drop of the low end completely.
Sure. Yeah.
Very cool. Tell us a story about working with Usher and Timbaland.
Timbaland was a quick gig, but it was definitely a highlight of my career so far, just because he was so cool. Like I was actually surprised about how cool of a person he was. I mixed. He was working on an album called Shock Value, which is basically a producer album. So he was the artist, but he was more just the producer, and he had different singers on every song, And he had mostly one person mix that whole album, which was Marsala Aracia. Hopefully I didn't butcher her name too bad, but she mixed everything except for the one track I mixed. It was wild because my mix was so different, and then the mastering, I forget who mastered it, but the mastering was wildly different than my mix was, and I think that's because she mixed the whole album. And I wish I had like a copy of one or two songs of her mixes before I did my mix, because I would have gone in a different direction. But he loved what I did, so I guess as long as he was happy, it didn't matter. But the mastering definitely took my mix in a different direction, pretty extreme, just to be able to match and fit the album better. But yeah, that was definitely a fun experience. And definitely the song was very forward thinking. It was called Fantasy. I think it's number 9 on that album. But it's weird for me to listen to it because it sounds pretty wildly different than I intended, but
right, because the mastering changed it up.
Yeah, but it's still good, and people tell me they like it. But the song itself and the production, I haven't listened to it in a while, but I could almost say it could be released nowadays because it was very forward thinking as far as sound choices and arrangement and I don't know, just vocal effects. Just from memory, it feels like it was pretty modern. So yeah, it was definitely a fun experience.
Right on. What about when you're mixing? Do you find that using a template or starting from a template is a standard way for you to be efficient and productive? And is there anything you want to share about that at all?
Sure. You know what? I didn't answer your second half of that question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, about working with Usher.
Usher. So that I might as well mention that because that was pretty interesting. That was with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and also the Avila brothers, production wise. And I learned a lot on that because Terry Lewis is so into vocal rides. And at that point I had done vocal rides, but it was pretty just a very general passive automation on the vocals to make sure, the words are heard. But he was more into syllable manipulation, and he probably wouldn't even describe it as that in depth, but that's what I took away from it. And just rhythmic movement, making the vocals sound more exciting by moving the fader on syllables to make things jump out more. And and then just, I don't know, it was a very cool project. The tracks were massive. It definitely took 2 or 3 days to mix. And I was mixing on an SSL with outboard gear, and two of the songs took 2 Pro Tools rigs to work on the song.
Wow.
One session, a song called Monstar. It's like Monster, but with an AR. That song really, to keep every track one for one and have no sub mixing, it would have taken 3 Pro Tools rigs at the time because tracks were limited on Pro Tools back then. And that's with Pro Tools being able to do 192 tracks. So I think we had over 400 tracks on that song initially. And the reason for that one was because that song had a bunch of effects that were like one time they happened and then they never happened again in the song. Yeah. And it had a very long intro and it had a ton of vocals because it was a very, very weird song. It could have been an interlude, but it was long enough to be a whole song. And it did develop into a song, once it got going, but it was just an insane amount of tracks. And I think 2 vocalists were on there and lots of changes from section to section, all new drums. So the songs were massive, but it was a lot of fun and a big learning experience as far as being sure to make the artist happy with what their preferences are. And on one hand, Usher is very easy to please because he doesn't even come to the mix sessions. He trusts Jam and Lewis and the Avila brothers. He trusts what they're doing. So, but they know what he likes and dislikes and certain effects he didn't like. And they never even want him to hear that effect if you put it on his voice. And they're like, oh no, that's not going to work. Change that because he won't like that. So that was a great learning experience for me, just to about pleasing an artist and pleasing producers, and me finishing a mix in one day and then the next day us working on it the whole day, and then a day after that still working on it, and me realizing like, oh, so they liked the mix. They said they liked the mix when they walked in 2 days ago. Why did we work on it so long? And then realizing what the reasons were and what they needed to get out of the mix to make them 100% happy, and experimenting with things and making sure they got the most out of their productions and stuff like that. So the Usher thing was a big learning experience for me as well.
It would be hard to describe in one sentence what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be easy to describe in 3 letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and the original 2520 op-amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with the Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, and customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082 or 2448 consoles. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Making sure your vocal sounds amazing in your mix starts with capturing your voice perfectly. This means controlling sibilants and plosives at the mic. Back when I started out, we used to make pop filters out of pantyhose and a wire hanger, but not only did it not look good or smell great, but it also didn't sound all that great either. There's a reason that the Beastie Boys said they never rocked the mic with the pantyhose. Fortunately, pop filters have come a long way in the studio, and Jay-Z Mics brings you the ultimate pop filter, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The Jay-Z pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while letting important high frequencies through for clarity. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. That's cool, and I guess we could pivot again to the mixing question, but maybe keep it in terms of mixing vocals. And I wonder if you want to talk about some of the basic things that for maybe what do you tell people to go look at these items when you're learning how to mix vocals. For example, there was a great video I saw of you using the Golfos plugin and showing multiband compression and things like that. What are some good plugins for people to be thinking about, whether it's brand or whether it's more like these are the styles of things you should, these are what these genres of plugins do for you?
Well, approach-wise, what I would always tell new people to do as far as mixing vocals is try mixing the vocal 2 or 3 different ways. And what I mean by that, and I'll just keep it to in the box plugins just for ease. But something I do is when I'm approaching a vocal is I like a lot of processing, and I don't mean effects like verbs and delays and stuff. I like getting that vocal exactly like I imagine it in my head, no matter what that takes. And so I will do that. If it takes 10 plugins, that's fine. Multiple de-essers, multi-band compressors, multiple EQs. I will just nip and tuck that thing until it's exactly what I want to hear. And if I can't get there, I can't get there. So I might reapproach it. But one of the things I do is I duplicate that vocal and I mute the first one that has lots of processing, and I'll do an easy approach. So I'll decide, okay, let me get a simple compressor, a simple de-esser, and then I'll get an EQ like almost like a Neve emulation or something that's very limited in its manipulability. Like instead of using something like Pro Q3 by FabFilter, which is amazing and I use it all the time, I'll use something that's really simple and has limited bands and something that I just cannot go overboard with, and or deciding, let me see what I can do with just 3 bands of EQ and see if I can just move the mid-range and the high end and the low end and get a great vocal. And then when I'm done with that, I'll compare it to the one I had with all of the, tons of plugins. And it just keeps me in check, trying things different ways. Sometimes I'll finish a vocal and then I'll duplicate it and I'll switch out one plugin and I'll try a different compressor. It's like, okay, well, this sounds pretty good, but now I'm kind of hearing this other compressor. Maybe this one will be more forgiving, or it'll make the vocal pop out in a way that's different. but I'll save my last one and compare them. So I think that's a very good method when working with vocals. It's funny, vocals, they're the most complex sound we mix because of the range of frequencies. They go from the subs all the way to the highest of high end and everywhere in between. And everyone is different. That's the crazy thing. Like, you can have a vocalist that has a very harsh high end right around 7K, but the next person you mix will have very smooth high end and hardly any S's. And so getting into not using the same settings, that's to your template question that you asked a while ago. I don't use templates because everything is different, and I also mix a lot of different genres. But if I were to have anything template wise, it would be like settings to remember for like a reverb effect or something like that. But EQ settings, compressor settings, I generally don't have them because I believe that every sound you work on is different from it was before. It's like, if you have a bass EQ setting, unless you keep coming across that same bass, used in song after song, which is, I don't know how that would be possible unless you were working on with the same producer that kept using the same bass. Unless that's happening, it's going to be different every time, especially if it's live music. Drums are different, guitars are different, the way they mic them, the key of the song changes how you EQ. So I've never really believed in templates because while they might be a good starting point if you're beginning, once you know what you're doing in some fashion, they kind of slow you down. Now, in recording, tracking, I do believe in templates. Having a good vocal recording template is great because it saves you time, and working with an artist, you want to be faster than they are so that they never have to wait on you, so you can keep the vibe of the session going. So,
oh, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. When to use a template and when not.
Yeah. I would recommend, as far as a shout out for a plugin that's great for vocals, is Soothe. It's similar to Golfos, which you mentioned, but Soothe 2 is a great plugin for smoothing out vocals, harsh vocals, and it's great on a lot of instruments. But that's one in particular that I like on vocals almost every time.
And it just sort of takes it takes the edge off things if there's something that's harsh.
And I think it's most people, including myself, we think of it as a mid to high end kind of plugin, but it can do lower frequencies just as well. But it's just great because it's essentially a multi-band, but it's not limited to like 6 bands, or it's kind of, I actually don't know what they call it, but it's so fine in its frequency selection, so it seems to be more transparent, and it can push down on such a small range of frequencies, and just do a better job about being transparent, rather than choosing a whole EQ band that spans from like 1K to 3K and compressing that. You're kind of getting more finite, and it just seems to be a lot more transparent, and it has a mix blend, like a mix knob, and I don't know, it just works for so many things, especially things that are harsh, like an acoustic guitar, or even I put it on claps and snares, and it can just be the perfect thing rather than doing static EQ or even doing a multi-band, which can be less transparent.
Okay, very cool. Let's pivot to another plugin move that is probably really important, and I don't think we can ever learn enough about it, which is just talk about high-pass EQ filters and the importance of using those in the right way when you're mixing.
Sure.
And how do we use them the wrong way?
Well, I think 2 big mistakes with those are not using them enough and actually using them too much. And so it's funny. It's like you can really clear out space in a mix if you use them a lot, but if you use them too high, I guess too high a frequency, like if you set if you're cutting lows on a sound too high, you can definitely be detrimental to the power and warmth and the bass sound of a mix. And you'd be surprised how important frequencies are to a sound that are low. But of course, you have frequencies that are too low, it'll eat up unnecessary headroom and space in a mix. So finding that magic place is very important. For instance, a vocal, like I've had mixes where there's just no room in a mix and a vocal is especially big in the low end, and I'll end up high passing maybe up at like 140 hertz, and that seems high because a lot of us, when we are recording and maybe before we start mixing a lot, we'll see on a microphone they have high passes at 80 or 70 hertz, and that can be great for a vocal, but it's made for like rumble in the studio, or the stand picks up foot rumble or someone tapping their foot or something. But when you're mixing, sometimes vocals need to be rolled off even higher, and even basses and 808s and kick drums, those can benefit from roll-offs sometimes. So I don't know, it's a tricky thing, and you have to use your ears, and you have to experiment sometimes. And sometimes I'll set a roll off in a general area where I want it, and then I'll play the whole mix. I'm listening, and I'll slide that roll off up and down and see what I like more, and see how it fits with the whole mix going. And sometimes I can make room and make a mix just open up by having it a little higher than I expected. And sometimes there's plenty of room for it to be lower than I expected. And on that note, actually low passing, high cutting can be very important. Right. And a lot of people just feel like, don't mess with the high end, let everything be airy. And you might be surprised when you cut the highs on certain sounds, including vocals. Not every vocal needs extreme air on it. People always think, oh, I got to use this air band on this EQ or this aural exciter. Or I just got to boost a shelf on vocal and create all this air. And sometimes it sounds better cutting that even down to like 15 kilohertz. Cleaning that up can take away harshness. And you would, for a long time, I thought, the harsh frequencies were like 2K to 6K, on a vocal. And it turns out that much higher frequencies can really be fatiguing on your ears and just make you not want to hear the song as much, So both high cutting and low cutting can be very beneficial. But, I've also seen where people don't low cut plenty of sounds. Like they won't low cut their guitars, and there'll be all this 10 hertz and 20 hertz in their acoustic guitar. And that stuff has no musical value at all, no benefit to the sound. And it can be eating up so much headroom where the bass and the kick drum and low end of a piano or strings are now suffering because there's this strange frequency in their acoustic guitar that's just muddying everything up. And it's not mud as in like, low mid mud or even 100 hertz mud. It's way lower, and you may not even hear it in your speakers. But by cutting it, you get the benefit of again, we were talking about woofers and also headroom in your DAW. If that stuff is cut and taken care of and cleaned up, you will have a lot more freedom in your mix as far as headroom and the movement of the woofer and space for other instruments and stuff like that.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to that importance of being able to hear what you're doing in the control room too. You mentioned that you don't use a template, but I would almost push back and say your monitoring is your template. That's the benchmark so that you can just make the right decisions with your ears.
Sure, absolutely.
And I think we're all so familiar with trying to make low-end decisions and not knowing. And, I had made that comment about mixing music where bass is, has a real important role, but as if there were genres where you don't necessarily have to hear it quite as critically. But truthfully, you're absolutely right. It's just simply setting the low cut appropriately for an acoustic guitar. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I've done that where I've cut out too much, and then I'm like, it's just no energy, and then you have to put it back again.
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, and this happens nowadays with me, is even like mixing, a clean electric guitar, and it's the feature of the song, and I don't want to cut out too much low end because it's the fullness of the whole song. For maybe the drums don't come in until like 2 minutes into the song, so that that electric guitar is the only thing that has low end. So I want to be very careful about cutting too much out. But then later on, I might reference the song and realize, like, well, even though I wanted to leave the low end there, it's too big. So it's funny. It's like you always have to listen. You always have to compare things, and a lot of mixing, I feel like, is second guessing, and whether that comes from a place of insecurity or just double checking your work. That it seems to happen a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very cool. All right, let's see. One other question about getting low end right is the loudness of the speakers too. So what do you want to say about the volume that you mix at, and how loud should things be? When is it appropriate to listen loud and quiet?
Well, I was talking about that in a chat room the other day on Clubhouse about that, and I kind of monitor at all kinds of volumes all day long. I move that volume knob all over the place, and I have this little trick I do where sometimes when I have the thought, oh, let me reach for the volume knob and turn it up, I'll actually decide, no, let me go the opposite way, and I'll turn it down and try to listen for the same thing I was trying to listen for. And I just kind of do that to kind of prevent myself from constantly turning things up, because everything sounds better louder, and everything's more exciting louder. And if you can listen, and this includes 808s and deep low end, if you can listen quiet and be excited about it, it's gonna translate better. And everything sounds good loud. When you have speakers loud, transients fill your ears, and they almost, I would say, they get past your ears, because I don't know, like they're so hard on your ears that you get numb to them pretty quickly, and it can throw off your perspective. And I don't know, like in the case of my speakers get insanely loud. They will get too loud for most people. I've had people have my speakers so loud that things will fall off, desks and stuff in my room. And, I'll have to leave the room sometimes when people want to listen so loud, but I definitely have had my fair share of very loud listening. And I don't know, you just have to be careful. It's a good idea to check things loud. I mean, you want to know if things hurt when you turn it up loud, and if you can make things sound more comfortable loudly, that's a good thing. But I'll give you an example. I had a phase in my career where I made everything super comfortable to listen very loud, because I happened to work for a producer daily that all he did was listen loud. Like, he only turned it down when he got tired of hearing things loud. And hopefully he can still hear now. But I spent many hours with earplugs in, but I was finding myself EQing all the high mids out, 2K and 3K and 1.5K, and it would make things easier on the ears to hear that loud. But later, when I kind of analyzed that, I realized I was taking all the mid-range power out of things, and things kind of sounded muffled or muted and not as exciting. And all we had for excitement was the super highs and the bass. So and that was just, my perspective of listening loud. It felt more comfortable, so I was making that mistake. But so that's the dangerous part of listening loud. Listening quiet, you get more of a true perspective. And also, the quieter you listen, the more the acoustics of the room are involved. So if you have a challenging
they
space
are
to work
involved if it's quiet, or when they're loud, it's involved.
When the speakers are loud, they're more involved. So if, let's say, you have a reflective room and you're listening quiet, you might be able to hear what's going on a little better. And if you can lean into the speakers, have them closer to you, you might be able to do better. But if you're cranking it and your room is drywall all over the place, it's going to be super echoey, and the acoustics are involved more. The bass the bass is excited more. Everything just becomes more of a mess when you listen loud. And I still like to do it, and clients like to hear it, and people like to make sure it's going to feel good in the club. And it's just fun for a playback when you got a room full of people. And even when I'm alone, I like to crank it a few times a day and listen to even certain sections. But I rarely listen from top to bottom of a song loudly, unless the client is here. And at that point, I'll let them put their hand on the volume knob and put it where they want to hear it. And if it's too loud for me, I'll either throw in earplugs or leave the room,
Nice. What about the opposite? So what are some pitfalls of mixing quietly?
A lot less pitfalls, listening quietly.
I mean, are there certain decisions that we make too bold of a decision at first? I feel like sometimes I've tried to mix quietly and I find out I like crank up the reverb too much, or I over compress something.
For sure. Like we have a threshold of hearing, and if you happen to be a musician and have slight hearing damage, and I'm talking slight, like as we get older, we just kind of lose certain frequencies just because of age, and everyone's different. Some people are 90 years old and hear incredible, but every human is different. And but we do have a threshold where if we listen quietly, we may not hear something so well, and we tend to make it louder. So that's why my monitor level is all over the place. Like I listen, I might have a resting volume for kind of each, loud, quiet, and super quiet. I might have like kind of 3 average levels I move the knob to, but it's all over the place for sure.
Mastering is a guilty pleasure. It's been phenomenal to hear a client tell me that the master wasn't just perfect, but it was right. It connected. I love assisting with the mixing process by giving free feedback, just because, if the mix feels some positive impact from my input, frankly, it'll be easier to master. At least 50% of the mastering is preparing the mix. If the mix is really good, most of the mastering is already done. It's much more of a conversation now from end to end. It shouldn't be a black art that's hidden behind closed doors. Shouldn't be a one-shot deal either. Even after the master is delivered, we can still work on it. We can even go back and make mix changes later and update the master for a fraction of the cost. That's the iterative master. I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. Let's talk about how I can help elevate your mix into the best master possible. Contact me and get free feedback on your mix or a free master demo at soundporter.com.
Adam Audio designs monitors with a mission to bring accuracy, transparency, and high definition to your studio, guiding you each step of the way on your journey from starting out in a home studio to installing your ultimate mixing setup in your pro studio. Check out their complete line of speakers and headphones, from the T-Series to the AX Series to their top-of-the-line S-Series, which all use the unique ART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that lets your speakers disappear into your music. Won't it feel awesome to make brilliantly accurate, creative decisions in your mixes because you can finally hear your music clearly? Your ears are the greatest instrument you have, and if you can hear the music, then you can mix the music. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at adam-audio.com/education. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mixmaster Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. All right, let me jump into some specific album questions, if that's all right. And then if you remember, great. If you don't, no worries. You can just riff on it.
Yeah, sure.
How do you create wide vocal and instrument effects like Gina Fontella's Circles and Evangelia Pame?
Oh, okay.
Pame? I'm not sure how to say that. Pame.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
those were kind of mixed around the same period of within a couple months of each other. And so Gina, her stuff is kind of already done for a most part, as far as reverbs and delays and what I do. Like with that particular producer, I believe that there were printed verbs and delays and spatial effects, and I kind of listen to those, decide if I want to keep them, and if not, I will recreate them with the same vibe, but maybe improve upon whatever I thought was lacking. And so I already kind of have, and then stylistically, that type of music is definitely, there's a trend going on that I follow. So and nice. It changes throughout the year. So I tend to pay attention to Spotify top 50, or which that song Circles is definitely indicative of popular pop music. And it happens to have a lot of low end, which was her request. I think my preference was a little bit tighter, but we went back and forth a couple times. And then in the mastering, we had, I think, 2 or 3 different versions of where we had the low end before she accepted it. And it definitely has a lot, but the song definitely has some width to it. And as far as specific plugins for width, which I will use on background vocals, instruments, key instruments throughout a mix, different synths and stuff. And then occasionally on certain mixes, I'll use it on the 2-bus. But I don't specifically remember on that song. But but the plugins is Leapwing is the company, and the plugin is called Stage 1. And I like that as a stereo widener because it cancels to mono perfectly. So I don't have to think twice about it. I just make things as wide as I want and then move on.
Very cool.
And then another widener I use that actually has kind of a chorusing effect, because I believe it uses time-based algorithm to make the widening, which is it's made by Joey Sturgis Tones.
Oh yeah.
It's called Sidewinder.
Oh, cool.
Side widener. That's a great. So those are kind of my 2 wideners. One that kind of sounds like an effect, and the Joey Sturgis one is great for making mono things wide because it adds that effect. And then Leapwing Stage 1 is great because it's so transparent and clean.
That's key to be able to have something that will actually take a mono sound and make it wider. Because I've had widener plugins that just do the MS, and you put it on a mono sound and it doesn't do anything at all.
Right. And I'm very careful with MS processing in general because it can do some weird things. Like I've known mastering engineers that they'll remove the low end with a high pass filter on the sides of a mix and then keep it in the center, and that's okay for certain songs, but it really depends what's going on in the bass. Like EDM, some songs, some basses will have stereo bass information, and it's actually bigger on the sides than it is on the middle. So if you remove it, it really changes how the bass was in that mix. So I'm very careful with MS processing in general. And then, so to that other song you mentioned, Pame Pame by Evangelina, that mix was a lot of fun. The producer is actually a decent mixer himself. And so I kind of had great stems to work with. But I think the vocal effects on that song were done from scratch. And I don't quite remember what they were. But that song was pop-esque, but also world music. So that was a lot of fun. But as far as spatial stuff, I don't quite remember what I did. It was probably more.
It's cool hearing you just talk about some of the plugins. I mean, again, it's like I think we all know that, it's the exact settings of every exact thing kind of doesn't always matter so much as knowing what tools to reach for and which ways to use them. That really helps. What do you ever use Motion? Michael Brower Motion?
No, I do not. I've received a bunch of sessions with that, but what's funny, so at the time of this podcast, I'm in this weird situation where I am on a OS that I cannot update for other reasons, and I have a certain version of Waves that does not have the Michael Brauer motion, and then I have another version of Waves downloaded, but on another system we tried installing it and it crashes the system. So I have to wait till I update my OS before I install the latest Waves, which
right.
happens to have the Michael Brauer, and I have tried it out at another studio and I like it, but I have not yet got to play with that at my own studio yet.
Well, there was one of your mixes, Backup the Siege, had a cool spinning echo on the background, backup stuff, and so it just reminded me to, ask you about that. But I know that. Do you use a lot of the Sound Toys plugins as well?
Yeah, for sure. Mostly Decapitator and Little Radiator. And then Crystallizer and they all get their use, but I would say probably those three are the most used. And then what is that, Little Plate? I love Little Plate. Yeah. That's a great reverb.
I know sometimes I feel guilty. I'm like, Lid, you should look for you have a lot of other choices, but it always sounds so good.
Yeah.
How about some of the Eventide stuff? Have you gotten into those ones as well?
No, I had their channel strip when it first came out. But I never really got into other ones, and I know there's people that like them, but I don't know. There's so many plugins, and I just forget about plugins because there's just so many to look after. So I just go to my favorites, and I think I don't know if it's called Black Hole, the reverb plugin. Yeah. That's one that's on my to buy list, but I just haven't gotten around to it.
Are there some reverbs that you found to be favorites for you, or some that you use over and over again?
Yeah, for sure. So the Isotope reverb, the new one, is great. Valhalla. So Valhalla has a few. Actually, they have a bunch that I use: the Vintage Verb, the Plate, the Room, and then let's see, some of the delay stuff they make I use. And then there's a company called Sonsig, Sonsig, that has 3 recreations of older units from, I guess, the early 90s or late 80s. And I used that Sonsig a lot just because it sounds different than what most people use. I think a lot of people use, their stock DAW reverbs, and also Valhalla Vintage Verb has become so popular, at least in the circles I work in. I hear it all the time. And as much as I love it, sometimes I just want something different. And then so I have a Berklee outboard unit, and I do use that, but they have I think it's new. It's called Seventh Heaven by Liquid Sonics, and they have it in our Studio A, and it without comparing it to my real Berklee, it sounds pretty dead on with some presets that I use. So I'll probably be buying that pretty soon, because it's great to have just for many instances in your song.
What about reverb that's not sort of plate oriented, but ambience oriented? How often does anything like that show up down in the low end section of a mix, around the drums and the bass and 808s? Are there ever ambience treatments that are part of getting the drums to sound right?
For me, very rarely, unless we're talking about live drums. Definitely room mics, and I have a few Ultraverb presets. Actually, there's an Ultraverb room I use called Tonic Room. It's a club in New York City, and I use that for rock guitars a lot, because it's kind of it's very low end heavy and kind of dark, and it just kind of adds a great space to guitars, and it takes up room because it's definitely for lack of a better term, it's very muddy as far as a room sound, but it's great to actually fill out something that kind of sounds thin as well as give it a space. And then sometimes on big live drums, or I might have some reverb that ends up or a space that ends up on a low frequency thing, and occasionally, very rarely, for a live bass on a song, I'll put a room effect. But I tend to like just dry, low frequency instruments, unless I'm going for a special effect,
Okay, here's a couple more records, and I keep going back to low end questions.
Yeah, sure.
So Mars versus Venus with Usher. That one, in the second verse, this low sustaining keyboard enters. But, when I listened to it, I was struck by the fact that we already had this subby heartbeat kick going on. And I think it's really remarkable, your skill at adding more bass to bass and making it work. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that. Like, how do you do that? Do you sometimes have to fake it? Do you make something move out of the way a little bit to add the new thing so that we don't overload?
I mean, that's definitely a technique. I think, man, I'm just a guy that nips and tucks at stuff until it all fits. And I have different tools for that. Sometimes it's just straight up EQ, and sometimes it's special processing. Like Isotope makes the low end focus, which is a great thing for getting your low end in phase and making two things live together, or a whole mix live together down, in that world. And then sometimes it's just perception. So something might have a resonance at 50 hertz, and then the other thing that you want to live in at the same time in the song, same moment in the song, might have their resonance higher up. So one might be at 80 while one's at 50. So I might, kind of like what you said, move something out of the way. I might EQ 50 out of the thing that kind of resonates at 80 to make more room so they both can exist at the same time. Also, ducking and side chaining can be a big thing. I've always done that with basses and kicks. I'll side chain a bass with the kick to get the bass out of the way, because usually and I don't mean an 808, by the way. I just mean the kick drum and like a synth bass or a live bass.
Yeah.
Those usually have longer notes than a kick drum. So I'll let the kick drum move that bass out of the way for a split second by a few dB, making a hole for the kick to happen. And I've even done that with volume automation when necessary. And then 808s is a whole nother game. Sometimes I get songs from producers that they'll have a synth bass and an 808, and they won't work together at all, and that's always a challenge. And again, it's sometimes it's taking the 808 and adding distortion to it, whether you mostly that would be parallel distortion. And a good thing with that is for that is the capitator, because it has a mix knob, and you can saturate the 808 and blend it in so that it makes a difference, and it kind of wakes up the 808 in the mid frequencies and makes it more audible, but yet you can actually turn down the volume of that 808, and perceptionally it seems louder and like it's bigger, but you've actually turned it down from where you first started, and that'll make more room for the synth bass. And another trick would be taking a synth bass and actually removing low end in the middle, and that can take a lot of splitting and multing and forcing the middle of the bass to almost go away. You can do that with Wave Center, or Leapwing makes one called Center 1, and actually lowering the middle of that sound so that it lives more out on the sides, and then have an 808 or a kick live in the center. And then you can kind of have those things more together. And of course, when you sum to mono, that it won't help you as much. But
right.
In the stereo world, and you have to hope that, especially in EDM, a lot of people are listening, to music. If they're enjoying it, it might be more in a stereo situation. You might hope, or I might hope. But that's one trick that I've done before. But low end is by far the most challenging aspect of mixing. And I think everyone agreed to that. And that's why, how we started this conversation with acoustics. That's why those things are so important. And also speaker selection. I think a lot of beginners would be surprised how different speakers sound going from one brand and one model to another. And I've gone through so many pairs of speakers as far as near fields in my room, just trying to find a speaker that I like. And, it's funny, like having to buy a pair of speakers online or from a store and then go home and set them up in your apartment, and not knowing that a different pair of speakers would actually be way better for you, and you weren't
Right.
even thinking about that brand. It's like it's a tough game, the low end game of mixing.
Well, I always liked to just, if you can go to a store that's got a variety of speakers, just go take music and sit there and flip around between them and listen to them all. Because again, you get really struck by that. But maybe not everybody has that opportunity. But hopefully, if there's a big box music store like a Guitar Center and that kind of thing, you can at least get a chance to hear a lot of the popular ones.
And it's great if they have a return policy and you can take them back. It's funny. There's a $8,000 pair of speakers that is very popular amongst mix engineers, and they just do not work in my room. As much as I wish they did, they don't. So it's funny how a room will change things.
Yeah. Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. When you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then get started at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. Okay, so Lupe Fiasco Deliver. That one also has like a punchy kick, but then it's got a sustaining sub bass. And I don't know if you would remember this specifically, but it's sort of the way it sounded. I didn't feel like I was hearing the sustaining sub bass being affected by the punchy kick, or like they weren't fighting each other. And I wondered if there was, do you bus certain low end instruments together or not together? Any more comments about that?
So no, like low end elements in my mix don't get together until the two bus. And I don't really have any specific reason for separating them other than the fact that I just want individual control on my submaster. So I'll have submasters with kick, drums, any high end percussion, and then bass, and then the rest of the music. If there's live strings, I'll have a live string or horn bus, and then vocals, and then occasionally I'll split out my vocal bus to a background vocal and a lead vocal bus. So they're separated until they hit the final master fader. But on Deliver, I'm pretty sure that I did the sidechain trick where I took a Waves R compressor and I set the key input fed from the kick drum, and I just ducked the bass out of the way for the instant that the kick played. And I'm careful about my release time. The attack time is always instant because I want the transient of the kick to get through and to knock down that bass right away. Mm-hmm. And then whatever the length of the kick is, I'll try to, by feel and by, listening, I'll try to find a release time, which many kicks, if they're not long in nature, the good release time is between 80 and 130 milliseconds. And that will allow the bass to recover to its original volume without much notice. If you have the release too long or too fast, you'll notice pumping, or you'll just notice holes in your bass when it gets turned down by that compressor. But with Deliver, also the sounds were just great. And that's probably the best, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a trick, but the best situation you will have with low end is if the sounds just work together well. So that's all on the producer or the composer, whoever's choosing those low end sounds. And there's so many times where, from that perspective of low end gelling together, the wrong kick was chosen, or there's one too many basses. I'm a firm believer in one kick, one bass, and some people just can't help themselves, and they'll have a kick, an 808, a synth bass, maybe two 808s. I've even seen two 808s, and it's just a mess. I've seen out of tune 808s, and sometimes that out of tune 808 just gave them a feel that they like, and if you tune it as an engineer, they don't like it anymore. So it's definitely a fight. But when a producer uses a great kick with a great bass and they work together, half the job is done, or sometimes all of the job is done already. You just have to not screw it up, And I've done plenty of times where I've replaced a kick, and I'll try to find something with the same vibe. And sometimes even I've run into samples where it's like, I know I have that kick sample, but it's unmixed because they probably gave me a resampled kick that has been through some processing. Maybe they distorted it. Maybe they just clipped it when they bounced their stems for me to mix from. And I'll tell myself, oh, I recognize that kick drum. I have it somewhere in my library, and it's worth it for me to go through and search it, whether it takes me 20 minutes or not. And I find that original kick, I'll put it in, and the producer thinks I worked wonders because now it's undistorted and it's clean and it works. And what's funny is sometimes the distortion is the thing they liked. So sometimes I'll recreate that distortion or leave the original kick, but sometimes replacing and layering, there's so many tricks for low end and making basses and kicks gelling, and I use all of them, and it's never the same. And it's always always an experiment. But the Deliver record, I get a lot of compliments on that low end, but yeah, I believe it was the sounds chosen which made that one magical.
That's cool. A couple of things. One is swapping out the kick drum. It's the same reason why you do the 2 vocal passes, because after you do all that hard work, you might just listen to the one that didn't have so much treatment on it and go like, oh, I like that one better in the end.
Yeah, I mean, and I've definitely replaced drums and layered drums, and then and then I do my A/B to the original, and I realize, oh well, it's technically better, but the vibe is gone that they had. And, sure enough, the producer will mention something later. It's like, oh yeah, I'm glad you kept the vibe on the kick that I, chose, So it's definitely a game. And if you're doing all this production and mixing for yourself as an artist or a producer, and you're not dealing with major label artists, you have a lot more freedom and you just do what you want, but, when you have to please people, it becomes a game of what's possible to do and what you should do and what you can get away with doing. And, but one thing back to that Deliver record is the synth bass is lower. To me, it feels lower than it feels because it's so nice and deep and full, and there's nothing else down there competing with it. And the kick is just a short punch that punches right through it.
Yeah.
But that Deliver bass, that it's not that loud. It could be a lot louder, but it just sounds impressive, So
well, and you did such a perfect job of ducking it, because I was thinking that was the example of one where the bass didn't get ducked by the kick, but you did it. It's because you nailed it,
Yeah, you just got to find that perfect release time. And I've had, what's weird is I've found sometimes I'll bypass that R compressor that I use, and it just works better with it not ducking in certain songs. So that's the mystery of low end,
Right on. Well, before I move to our closing question, I'll just give a shout out again. Thanks to Mayor for making our introduction.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever get a chance to work together?
Yeah. I send him mastering stuff.
Oh, right on.
I send clients to him sometimes, and I've definitely gotten into his new processor, the Oven. I have serial number 2, and it's probably my favorite piece of analog gear I've ever owned.
That's cool. Tell us about the Oven. What does it do?
So the Oven is a analog processor that's it's basically tubes and transformers and things to manipulate that. So it has an input gain, and then it has 2 knobs that drive different tubes and transformers differently. And you push the signal into it, and it can add weight, or it can add saturation, fuzziness, and there's different switches to manipulate those in subtle ways. And then it has 3 bands of EQ, but it feels like a guitar amp. It's just bass, mid, and treble, almost like tones on an old Fender amp. And it does have a switch for each, so you can choose the range of the low, mid, and high, just one other choice, but it doesn't have bandwidth and a bunch of frequencies, sweeping knobs and stuff like that. So but and the more you saturate the unit, the more those three bands of bass, mid, and treble become saturation, so you can saturate your high end rather than just straight up EQ. And then if you don't push it very hard, it's more like straight up EQ. And then it has an air band, but it's just I don't know. It's funny because I'm a firm believer in plugins and the fact that we don't need much analog gear to achieve great results these days. But when I use this piece of outboard gear, I very much feel like, okay, this is absolutely analog, and I hear it. And the type of saturation and air band kind of EQ that I get from this thing is better than any plugin I've encountered. And so far he's only made 6 because of COVID, the pandemic. They don't have access to a key component on the inside that they need. But they did just sign a deal with Plugin Alliance to do a plugin by the year 2022. So other people will get to experience it,
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. I feel like maybe it was Efrey Chippen when he was on again, just talking about how Transformers and the sound of iron and stuff is one of those things that analog just is,
Yeah, absolutely.
Just really does such a great job with. Very cool. Well, let me go to our closing question. Bob, you've been awesome for hanging with us for so long. I've just been grilling you with low end questions.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
Yeah. So this one is a hypothetical one. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You get to go back, find young Bob, playing bass in the hallways. And you say, listen, dude, I know you're into recording and stuff like that. I've come back in time to give you this single bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
I have to narrow it down to one single thing.
Yeah, you can just keep going if you want.
I think there's a lot of things I would say, but
bass. That's the answer.
I think I think the most important thing would be make sure that you're loving the music you're working on, and the people that you're working with. Don't just work to work, like I'm definitely, I've always been a person that just takes gigs to have more gigs. And, like I've been telling people lately, in certain stories, like between March and October, I mixed 125 songs or maybe a couple more than that. And, I don't think I needed to do that. And, that's kind of, I'm always mixing. Like I just, and I think I just took gigs because I didn't want to give them up, and I just wanted everyone to know me. And, I have a zillion people, following me on social media, and, definitely there's guys that have more, but, I just wanted to always meet more people and work on more music. And I've loved a lot of it, but I think loving the music you're working on, loving the genre you're working on, and enjoying the people you're working with is more important than career and money and all that kind of stuff. And I think those things will come if you're doing what makes you happy. And I think going along with that, as far as loving what you're doing, it might have to be outside of the music business. It might just have to be just working on music because you like to work on it, and maybe it won't be a career for you. Maybe it's just something you like to do. I've definitely seen singers, engineers, producers, everybody that they're unhappy, but they're getting their work done, and it's like at the end of your life I don't think that's what you want, like you want to be sure you enjoyed your life and loved what you're doing, especially the hours that we have to put in as engineers. Like you spend most of your life doing this, and then the rest of your life sleeping, and then a small amount of time, spending it with others and loved ones. And it's like, you need balance. Yeah. And took me a long time to realize that. So if there had to be one important thing I would tell young Bob, is probably that. And and that doesn't necessarily mean less success or slower climb to the top or anything. In fact, it could mean the opposite. But if you're happy along the way, then it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, man. And I'm always reminded that when we do the things we love to do, the quality of our work can shine through. And that's a testament to what you said. It might actually get you somewhere faster sometimes to do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, very cool, man. Well, dude, thanks so much for hanging with us. Let the rock stars know where they can go find out more about you. You've got some great teaching online too, so feel free to give a plug to anything you want people to go check out. And
sure.
Where should everybody go if they need to mix their next hit record with you?
Instagram is probably the most solid, and that's just Bob Horn Mixing is my handle on Instagram. I have the same handle, it's just my name on Clubhouse, and then my emails are my name, so it's Bob with Mixing, so Bob Horn Mixing at Gmail, and then I have a website, Bob Horn Mixing. I try to keep everything the same, and then as far as tutorials, I'm about to do a new one for Pro Mix Academy, which is also produced like a pro.
Warren Hewitt.
And I have, Warren Hewitt. I have about 5 or 6 on there now from over the last probably 5 or 6 years. So I'm about to film a new one. And then mixinnovator.com. That's a Korean website, but they have an English version, and I'm on there. They just got started, so they have like me, Pensado, and I think a producer. I forget the name right now, and maybe one more person so far. But I have a great tutorial. It's probably my most recent tutorial is on there, and it's a quirky pop song by a K-pop artist, but the song is in English, and it's a very interesting mix. And then groove3.com. It's just the word groove and then the number 3. Eric and I, my studio partner, we did some tutorials as a team. And those are very interesting and unique because we basically took submissions from non-professionals in their mixes, and then we would pick a song that we felt like we could lend the best help to. And what we did was we took their session, their multi-track Pro Tools session, and we basically mixed that, but we kept their session untouched in the same DAW session. So I had their tracks as maybe red and my tracks and mine and Eric tracks as green. And then we could A/B back and forth. Like, here's what they did on their mix with the bass, and here's what we did different on the bass. And we could compare that. And I felt like that was a very unique teaching mechanism to show the different things we would do to create better results, but on the same song by a non-pro mix and then by us. And so groove3.com has those tutorials, and I believe they're under the title of EchoBar, our studio, not our names. But
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then just a reminder, Rockstars, click through the show notes to get to Bob's website and also to listen to his music and stuff like that. Try and make it easy for you. I don't know what else there is to say, dude. Just thanks so much for hanging with us, man. This is awesome. Hey, don't do 135 podcasts between March and October. I don't think there'll be anything left.
I definitely won't. I don't think I could talk about that many things. So,
well, man, a real pleasure hanging out with you. Really great to meet you. Thanks so much for hanging with us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
All right, man. We'll catch up with you soon.
Okay, talk to you soon, man. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and Jay-Z Microphones. Remember to get your free mastering demo at soundporter.com and use the coupon code ROCK10 at Isotope for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free subscription trial to get access to lots of their plugins. And use the coupon code ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off this very pop filter you're hearing right now for a limited time. You will find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Hugh McDonald, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. You guys rock. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.